I will review a little bit of the topics that we have been researching over the years with respect to the Ethereum ecosystem. And the reason is the following. In my team, we are performing research on three main areas of knowledge in the area of blockchain. On the one side, we are very interested in consensus, scaling of consensus, but specifically on which are the limits that consensus has. For example, when you have networks that are growing and you need to diffuse data in terms of blocks, and you need that this data is reaching all the nodes that are present in the system, that all the nodes receive the blocks that are being broadcasted, you have finite time and you have the diffusion is taking longer, the more data these nodes are, the more data the blockchain is storing. This introduces some physical constraints to the quality of consensus in blockchain-based systems, but also it enables the possibility for different kinds of strategic behavior by the participants in the system. And we are very interested on how this abnormal behavior away from the implicit rules that the protocols have, affect the quality of consensus or affect the way in which rewards are distributed. Reward distribution is also something that is very interesting to us. We are very interested in understanding how the way in which rewards are distributed eventually affect large-scale properties of the economy of these systems. For example, the level of concentration, the level of economic concentration of wealth and inequality that is present in these different systems. I will talk a little bit about this in a second. Cryptoeconomics is very interesting. You can lead not only at the layer 1, but also looking at what happens at the level of token economies. So cryptoeconomics is, and tokenomics is something that we are very interested into as well. And we do not do this in a traditional approach that economists do. It's not that we are just doing formal modeling of this, mathematical modeling, but we are also very interested and we perform a lot of large-scale blockchain analytics. It's exactly in contrast to what was explained before. Most of the blockchain-based systems still allow us to analyze the transactional data at all the possible levels, and what we use this data for is to understand economic mechanisms that drive emergent properties. And as you see in this first slide, what is very important for you to remember is that when you look at the global properties of the system, you see that there are some properties that naturally emerge. You see that economic inequality is just something that emerges because of the economic interactions between the participants. And this inequality or this concentration that happens, for example, at the level of consensus power in participation in the consensus, is something that is not enforced top-down. It is something that just naturally appears because of the economic incentives that are placed in the system, and because of the bilateral interactions of people that is transacting value. So all these properties naturally emerge and are not imposed top-down by system designers. And what is important as well to remember is that once you have properties that emerge, these properties are robust against changes. Okay, so you need to think carefully on how the systems are designed at the microeconomic level in order to get properties that are more akin to those that you may want to see inside of the systems. And I will talk a little bit about some of the missteps that different layer 1 systems, Ethereum as well in a way, have taken when designing the incentives as a blockchain-based economy. Okay? One of the main reasons that to me has been always fascinating and that eventually determines at a very large scale what happens with respect to power accumulation in blockchain-based systems is thinking that there are decisions in which the allocation for example, the supply of new assets of Ether for most of the time in which Ethereum was running was a deterministic issuing of new Ether. And this is not something that is allocated by the market. It is not that the new Ethers were created historically for most of the time based on how much demand exists for the assets or how much people is using them. There was just a design choice done at the beginning of the creation of Ether and of Ethereum. And you see here you have the total supply as a percentage of the total supply that was already generated in completely different blockchains. You have a lot of UTXO-based one, all of them forks of Bitcoin. And you have there in yellow the total supply of Ether. You know that most of the Ethers were created at day one when they were together with the Genesis block. They were reallocated to the Ethereum Foundation. But you see that here, in contrast to what happens in real-world economies, always the growth of the supply is just a deterministic function. And it is, most strikingly, is a linear function. Okay? And when you look at, for example, how many accounts are created in most of the successful blockchain-based systems, some of those are not so successful in this plot. One thing that is interesting, once again you have Ethereum in yellow, is that you see that the y-axis is in logarithmic scale. The total number of participants in the system, the total number of accounts created in the system grows exponentially. So here you have a huge failure when thinking of the design of the system, because you have an exponential growth in the demand in principle, and you have just a linear growth in the total number of assets that are taking part of this. And this created, not only in Ethereum, but in most of the blockchain-based systems, an increase in centralization at the level of the incentives that you have in order to participate in the consensus. When you look into how unequal is the distribution of wealth in all these systems, once again you have that it saturates. The Gini index actually is not very good at measuring wealth inequality in blockchain-based systems because it very rapidly saturates to 1 when you have a lot of inequality in the wealth distribution. And while there has been a transition, one thing that we were analyzing as well, is what happens at the level of the fairness and the reward distribution in different delegated proof-of-stake-based systems. And interestingly, you can measure it in different ways, but interestingly what you see is that you have different choices, and Ethereum took one, which is that the total number of validators that are active in one of the eras is fixed. You have different degrees of freedoms of when you have delegated proof of stake. You may decide just to allow for an open-ended amount of validators that may be active in an era, or you may limit, like it happens, for example, in Polkadot, in this case Casper, and as well in Ethereum. Other systems like Cardano and Tezos, for example, allow for an unlimited number of participants to be active inside of each one of the cycles. And what we identify, however, is that with respect to the concentration, actually the design choice that Ethereum took, Polkadot took, and Casper took, that is limiting the amount of active validators, in a way is much more beneficial to the wealth redistribution, to the reward distribution, to make it more egalitarian in the long run. And it is very interesting because you may think that the way in which a proof-of-stake-based system may only affect locally or instantaneously the level of the rewards. However, it has a very long-term impact in the distribution of economic importance of the actors that are participating of the validation process. Another thing that we did research on for the past years was, okay, we have been looking at this level of centralization that happens in different blockchain-based systems. It happens at the level of economic concentration. It happens as well at the level of the validators that are participating of the a verification process inside of these blockchains. And actually what happens is that, I will not talk a lot about this, but we have been analyzing as well for the past years different token economies. And on the one side you have a positive correlation on the pricing of tokens and the amount of activity that they have inside of the blockchains. The more tokens are transacted, the more is the value that they end up having in the system. Actually, it is a law that allows us to recall a little bit what happens with the Metcalfe law. That you know that the larger a network is, in terms of number of participants, the more the participants assign value to the token. And this is exactly what we observe as well in the valuation of tokens with respect to market capitalization. However, what you see in the left panel in these two plots is that actually the level of centralization that happens in Ethereum tokens is incredibly large. There are very few accounts, in general smart contracts, DEXs, or centralized exchanges, that if you remove them from the system, the network of transactions completely collapses. So most of the tokens still means a level of concentration that is that of the speculative assets, okay? Because they are just traded in the market and not circulating organically inside of the economy. We have been analyzing layer 1, we have analyzing token economies, and there is a very interesting project that we have been looking into that is what happens with some DEXs, with decentralized exchanges. Because you know that in a centralized exchange, all the transactions take place off-chain, actually. They only happen logically off-chain, and the actual exchange of value of one token for the other is never realized inside of the blockchain. It only appears when one of the users wants to deposit or withdraw tokens from the specific exchange. And so I will talk a little bit about a platform that all of us know. It is Uniswap. And when we are thinking of Uniswap, there is something that happens, that is the creation of a liquidity pool is once again not something that a system designer, like in a centralized exchange, is creating. Liquidity pools are something that any user can do if they can provide liquidity for the trading pair. So the first thing that you may say is, okay, all the amounts that people is putting in each one of the liquidity pools, the amount of values that they are putting, all of them are completely independent. So perhaps we will see just some noisy pattern when we think of analyzing the whole structure of Uniswap. So we analyzed the structure of Uniswap version 2. And the question that we asked is, are there general laws that emerge out of this in principle and coordinated action of all the participants inside of this decentralized exchange? And what we identify here, what we analyzed is, by the time in which we analyzed it, at the beginning of this year, there were something like 40,000 different liquidity pairs in Uniswap. And in the y-axis here, once again, in logarithmic scale, you have the total value locked in US dollars in each one of these trading pairs. And in the x-axis, what you have is the decrease, in a decreasing order, the largest liquidity pools, starting from the largest liquidity pool to the smallest one. And what you see here is, once again, the x-axis is in logarithmic scale. And you see that this is a line. It is a line because in statistics, this is called the power law distribution. Actually, this is a SIP law, actually also signaled by the exponent, which is -1. And this is a typical trait that self-organized systems have. So even if people is independently pulling and adding and removing liquidity, buying and selling tokens inside of each one of these liquidity pools, all of them evince a very clear pattern of self-organization. You can build a network representation that is very important to understand how systemic are specific tokens in the following way. In this network that you see there, each one of the nodes is a token, and there is a link between two tokens if there is a liquidity pool between them. And what you see, it is very apparent from this representation, is that there are a few tokens that are completely systemic, and if they fail, all the system of Uniswap may collapse. And this is very important because this is the original version of Uniswap liquidity pool network, and this is how it evolved over time until mid last year. But you see that they are still heavily centralized. Okay, it grew a lot. They have many tokens traded inside of Uniswap. However, you have many of them are transacted against the same tokens. And what you see is that there are communities, from a network point of view, there are communities centered around the specific tokens in which there is a creation of a lot of trading pairs with respect to other ones. And what you see is that there are very few tokens that are completely systemic for the functioning of Uniswap. Obviously, the first one is wrapped Ether, then DAI, USDT, etc. This is in the last snapshot. You have a USDT and USDC as the most important ones in the system. Actually, if there is this plot there of Dogilon, it's because this is actually one top 10, and it is systemic inside of Uniswap. It is traded, it has a lot of value locked, and it has a lot of trading pairs with others. Okay. There is a very large level of inequality in the size of the tokens, etc. But the most important thing that I wanted to mention with respect to this plot is that actually the distribution of the sizes of all the liquidity pools of all this network, the importance of all the liquidity pools in this network has stabilized for almost 2 years. So actually there is remember what I said in my first slide. There is an emergent property in the structure of this network of liquidity pools that is stable. Even if it grows, it preserves still the same shape. And what we are investigating now, I will not go into much detail with respect to this, but what we are identifying is actually that if you look into rug pulls that have happened inside of this system, you see that also they have been affecting completely different sections of the network at all the possible scales, resembling very much the distribution of liquidity pools. And provided that we have had rug pools of all the possible sizes, it is a very important point with respect to analyzing how there can be a cascade of failures induced by this activity. The final thing that I would like to talk in the last 5 minutes that we have been investigating, doing research on, is we have gone all the way from layer 1 to tokens, later to what happens in the centralized exchanges. And one thing that is very important to have a functioning economy is endogenous circulation of cryptocurrencies, such that even if you have a limited supply, it is enough to satisfy all the transactions. Then you do not have speculation in rising prices, etc. And really, what happens in Ethereum if you want to see its economic activity? So there is a concept that macroeconomists have been using for more than a century, is that of the velocity of money. And in general, macroeconomists resort in order to use it in a so-called Fisher equation that provides it's tautological, actually, if you are thinking of this. Because in a real-world economy, you cannot measure the way in which the money circulates. The only thing that you can do is estimate the velocity based on other parameters, assuming that the Fisher equation is correct. Okay, this is what you traditionally do or people that is analyzing real-world economics do. What we have been doing for a couple of years already, we started analyzing UTXO-based blockchains, and now we also are finishing a paper in which we analyze this concept for Ethereum, is actually measuring the velocity of money inside of the Ethereum economy. But not only that, and what I like the most about this methodology is that we are not just looking at the macroscopic level of the velocity of money, but we were able to derive how much each one of the users of Ethereum is contributing to the global velocity, and understanding who is actually contributing and how unequal is the contribution to the global velocity. And in a nutshell, what we are doing is, if you have that Alice received 2 times Ether, one in the block number 10 and another time in the block number 20, she received 15 Ether in the block 10, 5 Ether and 10 Ether in the block 20. What we do is basically, and in the block 30, she sends to Bob the 15 Ether. What has happened so far is that there were 10 Ether that stood still for 10 blocks, and 5 Ether that were stood there in the wallet of Alice for 20 blocks. So if you take the weighted average of these two things, basically you know which is the velocity at which Alice's funds were moving in this period of time. Okay? And exactly because it is the approach that is taken usually in economics, what we assume is that the last money that you received is the first one that you are spending, okay? Because all the others are saving. You save money, and then when you earn new money, what you are doing is spending the last part that you received. So this is why we adopted this LIFO approach. So what we did is actually measuring first of all, the global velocity, and what you see is that there was a spike in the total velocity in Ethereum, triggered exactly by the point in time of 2817, which was the ICO craze. Okay? And interestingly, on the other axis you see in green and labeled in the right part of this plot, you see in green the total number of active users. And you see that it is only until 2018 that the total number of active users in Ethereum has been growing exponentially. Once again, you see that the scale is logarithmic. So after that, the total number of users has basically plateaued. And there is a lot of reasons for that. Gas prices have grown a lot. It's one of the reasons on why this thing has happened. But there was no so much economic activity anymore within the Ethereum blockchain as if it was happening inside of 2017, 2018, in that period. What is interesting is that here we have the 5 first most important nodes, users contributing to the total velocity in Ethereum. This is now the individual contributions before we looked into the global scale. And what we see here is that roughly 30% of all the total velocity is only originated in 5 different accounts. Okay? When you look at them, first looking at it from the global point of view, understanding which is the level of wealth that they have times the velocity of what they contribute, what you see is that a family of exchanges contributes is the largest one. Then, after you pass all this is the whole set of unidentified addresses, all the addresses belonging to Binance, Bitfinex, Kraken, etc. are the top 5 of the users. This is if you consider the wealth. If you do not consider the wealth, what you see is that the main activity that triggers the circulation of money inside of Ethereum are still exchanges plus the process of verification. Here it is written as mining, but it is all the process of reward distributions. And then you have Celsius networks, Nest Protocol, Oracle, etc. Another thing that you see is actually that there is a very mild correlation, almost zero, between the the wealth of the users and the velocity that they produce. It's basically flat, the process. And what is most interesting to me, and perhaps this is the time in which I can finish, is we can look at the distribution of how much is the microvelocity that each one of the nodes users is contributing to Ethereum. And once again, here you have a log-log plot. And once again, here you have a straight line, so it is a power law distribution in the velocities. And strikingly, and we can concentrate first on the right part of this plot, what you see is that there is a stable distribution that we are trying to understand why this is happening. There is a stable distribution in the contribution to money velocity of all the users that is stable with the power law of -2. But remember what I said before, because it is an account-based system, we are not sure exactly which are the assets that each one of the users is spending when they are spending money. In UTXO-based systems, you can certainly do that. But here we have to make the assumption of the LIFO, last input, first output. If you consider first input, first output, or if you consider just a randomized version of any of the prior transactions, you still see that the distribution of velocity is still the same. So this is an emergent property that is stable and that characterizes the contribution of all the users. Power law distributions are important because it means that you have a handful of very active users and you have a very large amount of users who do not contribute at all to the velocity of money. Okay? In a way, I would like to conclude this presentation that was very long, trying to say that we have to remember that all the systems, when we are thinking of this as an economic problem, we have to remember that all these systems are very far from equilibrium. As we have seen, number of users changes exponentially in number. So you cannot make models in which you are trying to come up with pricing, etc., need to take into account not only the fact that the system is out of equilibrium, that its parameters are constantly changing, but also that the complexity of human behavior is an additional layer of, as an additional factor that must be taken into account to better understand them. Thank you very much for the patience, people.
Very, very interesting, very in-depth. I know you're going to be around later on, so anybody who has an in-depth question will be able to ask you those questions then. This report that you just mentioned will be available soon?
We have the paper on Ethereum velocity out in a couple of weeks, yes.
Okay, okay. So very good timing.
Thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.